Hey everyone, welcome back to 3D6 Down the Line. We have a special treat for you this evening. We've got another Tack-on effects. This time we're going to be focusing on player mapping. And I brought none other than our cartographer extraordinaire, one Ted. Hello, Ted.
John, lovely to see you this evening. I was just thinking about maps, John. Look at that map. That is fabulous.
Coincidence, would that happen to be the map of Middle Earth, Ted?
Why? Well, I do believe it is. And look, everything's there. The rivers, the mountains, the forests, the good guys and the bad guys. It has all the features, all the tasty trimmings of a classic fantasy map.
Well, if anyone knew what he was doing, it would be that man.
My goodness, yes. Hi, John. I would love to talk about maps with you.
Excellent. I can see you dressed appropriately for the occasion. This is a serious subject.
Serious subject.
Indeed. So,
Most Gagliano understands how serious it is, and I do too.
so we have gotten a number of requests and comments throughout the couple of years that we've been doing the Halls of Arden now, or I guess it's a little over a year. And people have always remarked upon the fact that we do player mapping. And that is not something that you see a lot of, at least in actual play series. I feel that I'm pretty confident in saying that. And I feel it's also probably a kind of a lost art in modern day role-playing games. I'm not completely clued into exactly what everyone's doing on their own private tables, but I feel with like mainstream games that is sort of not the case anymore. And especially after the pandemic, where we saw the rise of people going online and using VTTs a lot more than they were in the past, that the general default is you have a pre-made map, and if you don't want players to know about it, you put Fog of War over it, and then as players explore on the grid, you slowly reveal the map to them as they explore, which is a totally viable way of playing the game. And
I had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's worth saying. Like, it was good stuff.
And there are certain games where I feel that that's the best use of that, like where you wouldn't even bother player mapping. But although I do feel strongly that should you adopt player mapping, that you can actually put it to use in a wide variety of games. It's not necessarily only for old school play. It's an element of old school play, but it can be lifted wholly out and dropped into any other exploration-based RPG. I feel pretty strongly about that. So yeah, whenever I started Halls of Arden, I was trying to go as old school as I possibly can. So I wanted to give the player mapping thing a try. Ted was game for it, which was awesome. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Ted, but you derive a lot of satisfaction and enjoyment from it when we do it, right?
I do. I actually, drawing maps is probably my favorite part of gaming in general in a lot of respects. I mean, like my own homebrew stuff, I love drawing my maps. So I was all over it being the semi-official cartographer. Matt has done a great job also.
As a backup,
but I do enjoy it. And I think that one of the things that I think is really great about it, and I think you were kind of getting at this, is that when you have, whether you're playing at the table or whether you're online, and the GM is providing like a pre-generated scene or map with Fog of War, or however it's done, it's all digital and printed out nice, whatever it is. I think there ends up being a sort of a passivity on the part of the player. They're just receiving information.
Right?
I
agree completely. Yeah.
So when I'm mapping, I'm really processing information. I feel like it makes me more an active participant in the game. And then we were talking about it the other day, and David was saying, even though he's not mapping, having the party building the map up and looking at the map together makes everybody in the party more active, right? It's like a group thing that we're focused around, which I think is totally legit. And I don't know if that was part of your intent, John, or if it was just something we kind of discovered doing it.
It wasn't, and that was one of the really cool side effects. Is one of the bonuses. I kind of anticipated, if you guys were into it, what kind of effect it would have, but the fact that it actually increases the bonds amongst the players, and also increases the buy-in. It engages, like you said, it actively engages your imagination.
Yeah.
So instead of, like you said, like passively receiving information, and oohing and awing over it, and it's pretty cool and impressive. You can derive deep satisfaction that what you're looking at, whether it's actually a physical graph on the table or something that Ted has actually drawn out in a program, is a work of art. It's something that's been, sketched out. There are differing levels, but it's something that you created. It's a creative work, I guess is the way I should put it, right? It is something that was not there prior, and then I conveyed information, and then all of a sudden it just appears, and it is something that you're actively engaging with at all times, especially in a dungeon crawl, which is what we're using. So when the campaign is a Megadungeon, and everything is based upon that, then the map is of crucial importance.
Oh my God.
And so
I mean, I've been through dungeons. Like, okay, so we played Dumblewood. We did the Winter's Daughter, that tomb. We mapped it out as we went.
Mm-hmm.
We could have gotten along without that map. It was not that complicated dungeon, right? We could have remembered our way around and kind of spatially held it together in our minds. Mm-hmm. But mapping it was fun. In Arden, man, we'd be so screwed.
Oh yeah,
if we weren't mapping. It would just not even happen. We'd all have died.
Absolutely,
because we'd have stumbled along some corridor, like, I don't know, let's go left,
But I mean, you could, playing devil's advocate, we could do what a lot of people have done with Arden, which is where they've got the lovely VTT maps, and then you just throw them up, and then you do the fog of war, and But it's not the same thing, right? There's a totally viable method of playing, but there's a level of satisfaction that you're not getting when you're not mapping on your own. And I know a lot of people too might get shy about it because they feel like, I don't have any artistic skill, I can't draw. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like I have zero, and when I'm a player in OSE games, I do my own mapping, and it's fine, And Ted has artistic skill, and Ted is also a stickler for detail as well. So you should also be aware that if you're a fan of our series and have been watching Ted map and how careful we are to get the dimensions right in every little bit, that is not necessary. You don't have to do that. It's more about to give the players a sense of where they might be in the relationship to everything else around them, and to be able to draw conclusions. And that does not require 100% accuracy. Ted and I enjoy doing that, but
I do like the accuracy. But in Hole in the Oak, I mapped it like a flowchart. I didn't worry about distances exactly or dimensions of rooms. I just made a box that was a room, and I knew that there was a corridor to the next room, and I just did a flowchart of it, and that worked just fine. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in some ways, it was great. I didn't really worry too much about distance and size of the room. I needed a place to record notes about the teleport circle, or this is where we found the giant, whatever it was, like a sturges or bees or something that stung one of the guys to death, Mm-hmm. Here's the ghouls that killed my character twice.
Right, exactly. And you don't need to know how many pillars were in the room or exactly. No. So that's actually a great point, Ted, is that in any medium that you want, on Miro, on a whiteboard, or in a VTT, or on a physical graph paper, you don't have to actually map. You can do mind maps or web what do you call it? The web thingies,
I know what you're talking about. The relationships of things and connecting them up. And
that's all it really is. It's all basically all these maps are just relationships to spatial relationships is basically what you're looking at. And it's also deeply satisfying, I think, whenever you're drawing your own map and you notice an anomaly of sorts, right? Like you notice, like, oh, that looks suspiciously like some negative space that probably shouldn't be negative space. Maybe we should search there, right? And it's always more fun to see that whenever you've drawn it and drawn the conclusion than it is whenever it's just revealed from fog of war.
Absolutely. I have to say, I know we've spent a lot of time trying to get dimensions exactly right. But I'm certain that in some cases, the rooms that I've drawn, because you're like, good enough. I know that it's not exactly how the map is.
Yeah, because I say good enough.
Right. So, but that's okay, because I'm imagining, and this is maybe getting a little, I'm going to nerd out a little bit here, but like I'm imagining, a little Mort creeping through the hallways with a piece of paper and a quill, and he's like got an ink pot on his helmet, and he's like trying to, draw the map and stuff like that. It's not going to be accurate. He's not surveying. He's not running down, measuring string and stamping chalk lines to see if things are level. Mm-hmm. He's just scrawling something, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, it kind of adds as much as one can to a fantasy setting like Arden Vul, a little verisimilitude.
Yes, exactly. That was actually a good point, Ted, because I was actually going to bring this up, and it's something that we don't do in our Arden Vul campaign. But I've read a lot of anecdotes from the true old schoolers, like the actual ones that were around back in the day, and probably still doing it to this day. Is mapping, player mapping, is actually supposed to be a reflection of your character in game actually mapping, and it's part of
Yeah.
the reason why dungeon exploration speeds are so slow. Is that that's
Yes.
built in? Like it's the caution and the stealth and the trying not to get eaten, but it's also assumed that one of your characters is actually physically mapping. Now I
Yeah.
haven't been that much of a hard ass on it. I kind of
say,
yeah,
I had a DM back in the day
yeah,
who, if you were drawing a map, it meant that character did not have a weapon in their hand.
right, right, or it would take it like, or if you walked into a room, I think what you're technically supposed to do, right, or at least the RAI, the rules as intended, is that you're supposed to, as a referee, when the party enters into a new room, you give the overall, without any math or anything like that, you just give the overall impression that the characters are getting from their five senses, and then if one of the characters, who's a mapper, actually says, "I take a turn to survey and map the room,"
Yeah, I
then
remember that.
yeah, then I would actually tell you, okay, then I would actually give you like it's 20 by 30 with this many pillars and blah, 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 it's just something to
I don't
think
think
about.
we should change how we're doing it now, but I do like that.
Yeah, it's cool.
That,
It's really cool.
that
And
is kind of cool. Yeah.
I suggest for anyone out there to give that a whirl and see how it works at your table. Because like Ted said, it increases the verisimilitude and the immersion. But I skip over it just for pacing's sake, really, is all it is.
Yeah. We got a lot to do.
Yeah, we got a lot to do. Now, the other huge benefit, and this can't be emphasized enough, is that it takes a huge burden off of me. It takes a huge burden off of referees.
Oh, sure.
As part of my OSR epiphany, I'm all about shedding responsibilities of the GM as much as possible. And if there are certain required duties that can be shouldered onto the players, I do it. And this is one of those things that you can do. I'm sure there are plenty of 5e referees listening to this and who have worked with VTTs, and how much time and effort it takes to prep those maps, get them all exactly the way that you want them, and only for your players to basically passively receive them, give you a nice compliment, and then move on. Right? Well, this is a win-win situation. You don't have to do that. You can give it to your players to do, and your players will actually enjoy doing it. At least I hope so. It might not be for everybody, but
I love it. I love it. I have now. I think I'm stumbling over my words here.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my love for it is, inherent, right? Some of it is that you're into it as well.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine there may be scenarios where players want to map and a GM has a hard time explaining rooms or whatever. It's a learned skill is the thing.
Yes.
And John and I have been playing together a long time. We've figured this out. We can do it.
Yeah, we know our love language.
It's measured in feet, baby.
No, but yeah, it's important to note though, is that if you're, once again, as we always preach all the time, this is a game to be played amongst friends in its most ideal state. And this is one of those where it comes to the fore, where if you understand each other, if there's a tacit language between the two of you, between all of you at the table, this will go a lot easier. It's not something that you would want to do like with strangers at a convention when you have a 2-hour slot, right?
I was just thinking that, like, we're going to GaryCon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, God willing, and the creek don't rise.
Yeah.
We're going to be doing these short slots, and what would you do? You're running a session. What are you going to do?
My plan right now is actually we still got a lot of months, so these may change, but sure. I plan on maybe just leaving it up to the group, like having the materials there, and the group votes if they want to play our map. Then they can. If not, I'll just have maps ready. Not a big deal.
This might be a great scenario. We're doing the just spatial relationships and not getting into the nitty gritty of dimensions.
Yeah.
Room, corridor, trap, door.
Totally. And that's all it needs to be.
It out
it's really all it needs to be. It's really about the player skill. That's another aspect of it too. That's very OSR, is that it's a test of player skill, right? Which is a huge part of any OSR playstyle, is using not what your character's intelligence is on the character sheet, but using your own intelligence, your own ability to draw maps. That's a huge plus as well. But this is a test of both referee and player skill and their ability to communicate with each other. Communication is the key to good mapping and to keep up the pace so that everyone else isn't bored while this is happening. So yeah, so I just wanted to go over real quick if my recommendations, and if Ted, if you have any as well, just let me know. But what I use for physical graph paper when I play at my games in person is I use a big guy here. I don't know if you can see that, but it's quite large. It's 11 by 17. So
Right.
it's twice the width of a typical letter size piece of paper, U.S. letter sized. So, and that has 4 squares per inch, which is large enough to draw nitty gritty details and also take notes at the same time, I feel. But it's not too unwieldy. And what's nice about those sheets is that you can take one, map on it throughout a game session, have plenty of room to map basically anything that you need to map, which is really nice instead of like a little field notebooks, which you're not gonna be able to draw too much. Has like a large space, but then you can just literally fold that in half and stick it into your folder, right? And it'll fit
Yeah.
perfectly. So
Yeah.
I'll have a link for that, an Amazon link for that down below in the description if you want to hit that. But I've been using this for years and I love that graph paper.
I have often used the 8 squares per inch, which is twice the detail on that one, which
That's
is great
tiny.
when you are. What's that?
That's tiny.
It's tiny. It's tiny. Well, I like to draw very small, tiny lines, but the 8 squares per inch, you can easily, just do 2 5-foot squares, and you got a 10-foot corridor kind of thing. You're not like limited to drawing tiny, but it does help when you're doing a 5-foot corridor, or you maybe in advance your GM tells you this is a really big dungeon. You're going to need a lot of map space, rather than having 2 sheets, use a smaller one.
Mhm.
It's personal preference, obviously. That's a very large piece of paper. It's probably not an issue most of the time.
Yeah.
Because I think most DMs, when they create their maps, are using an 8.5 by 11 piece of 4 squares per inch grid paper for drawing out the map.
Very true.
Like
Yep.
you used to do in study hall in high school, and you'd be drawing maps.
It's funny how all dungeons seem to be the same size.
It's
Why is that?
weird.
Now, let me ask you this, Ted. What's your personal preference? Do you prefer to have grid lines or do you prefer points on your paper?
That's a good one. I have done both, and I find that I'm more freely creative on points
Mhm.
when I'm creating a map. But when I am, this is for GMing, right? Like, so I'm creating a map. I like to do points. But having the grid there really makes it easy to communicate to players. And so as a player, when I'm mapping, I like to stick to the grid rather than the dots. But the dots is very creative, open space. You have a little bit of reference there to kind of keep straight lines and things, but
Right.
you don't feel like constrained by the grid line.
So it's
You know what
better
I
for
mean?
being like creative, in your opinion, like when you're creating maps rather than
Yeah. So when
taking
I've
what
got a
I'm laying
notebook,
down.
yeah, when I'm creating maps, I've got a sketchbook that's in dots, and I'll sketch stuff out, right? And then I'll transfer that to a grid line later, and then it's easier to communicate to a player. But yeah, as a player, I use the grid for sure
Gotcha.
for mapping.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Unless I'm doing the flowchart style, and then even just a blank piece of paper works fine. You don't need any straight lines on that. You just need to understand the relationship between rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're creating, and to be clear too, there are hundreds upon hundreds of great dungeon mapping creation videos on YouTube and tutorials by people who are much smarter than we are, and who have a much larger viewer base. We're the most criminally underwatched YouTube.
criminally.
Criminally. But
this video is going to be the thing that tips it, right, though, John?
That's
right?
exactly right. This is going to put us over the top.
But sweet.
What we feel that has not been done a lot, though, I don't think there is a lot of videos or a lot of stuff written about actually in the moment dungeon mapping by players during a session. There's plenty of stuff about how to create a cool dungeon for your players, right, and how to do that during GM prep. And we're not talking about any GM prep whatsoever here. We're talking about in the moment where the GM is referencing an already published or something that he's already created, a dungeon of his own, and then conveying that information to a player to then map it from scratch. So that's what we're dealing with here. In the interest of that, so that's the physical graph paper that I recommend. As far as digitally, you guys have probably noticed that recently we switched over to a program called Miro, which is not a VTT. It is a online whiteboard app that is used for any number of functions, but it's mostly a business related app for there's a fancy word for it, but collaborative workforce sort of stuff, projects and things like that. But we find it works really, really nice as far as a whiteboard goes. But what I'm about to tell you here is also equally applicable to all of the major VTTs. So Roll20, Foundry, Owlbear, Fantasy Grounds, any of this sort of stuff. Anywhere that basically would serves as a image holder that you can then interact with, right? You can lay tokens on, draw lines, all that sort of stuff. What you need to do in order to get yourself a grid map is actually create an image file that is a grid. Now, on a lot of the more advanced VTTs, they have grid functionality to begin with, and so you can just kind of skip this this part. But if you need to actually just come up with like a decent looking white background with some grid lines on it, it's actually very, very simple, provided you have access to some sort of photo editing software. I won't give Adobe a dime, but if you've got Adobe, feel free. Adobe Photoshop would work, of course. I use GIMP, which is the open source clone of Photoshop, and I love it. But the basic steps are very, very easy. You're just basically going to go in. You're going to open up a square image, is what you want to do, a blank image, and fill it with whatever color you want. White is what we use, obviously, and then your program of choice should have an ability to actually overlay a pattern, a grid pattern over top. In GIMP, it's under filters. You can add a grid. And then in order to size it correctly, you just need to divide the number of image pixels that the entire image is by the number of squares. And that'll give you the width and height and pixels of each square. So what I did for Arden Vool, because the maps are varying in scale and size, even though most of them are 10-foot squares, they vary, the levels vary widely in scale. So I created a number of blank grid images. One was 50 by 50 squares, one is 100 by 100, one's 150 by 150, and one is 200 by 200 for the very largest levels. And then all of those are on square image files. And then I uploaded those to my VTT of choice. At one time it was Owlbear Rodeo. Now it's Miro. Are you going to say something, Ted?
Well, to that point, which it's not a huge issue, but I thought it was something interesting to flag for viewers who might be just copying this wholesale. So I don't know if the viewers have been able to see at some point yet our full whiteboard with all the maps on it, but all of the grids are the exact same size physically on the screen.
Yeah, let me show that while you're talking about here.
Right. So which, as you said, means that the scale of each of those squares is slightly different, which is fine on each individual map. Right. It did present with, for me, a slight problem when I wanted to start overlaying my maps to see where my intersection points were. I had to change the scale.
Right.
So if you want to save your players a little headache, you wouldn't do it that way. You would have thought of me first, John.
And how would you have gotten around that issue?
Well, I mean, you would say make a bigger square, and you wouldn't have all these squares on the map be the identical size. I'm saying that wrong. You wouldn't have all of these individual white maps on our whiteboard be the exact same size. They would be different sizes but they would all have the same exact size little
square,
tiny square.
Each square would be the exact same size.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's not how it
because you can, which I discovered. And then all I had to do was just change the scale of the map that I wanted to overlay until a known reference point was the same size as another known reference point.
Right. And a good example of that is Ted did this with the Druid's Retreat level, which is up here in the upper right, and let's zoom in on that. So this level, for those who have been fans, you may have remembered, was a very odd map because the map was 50-foot squares. Right. So
huge.
Yeah, a huge amount of distance being covered here in these tunnels, right? And then, as you may remember out there, they actually drew the conclusion, thanks to the maps that they drew the conclusion that, oh my God, I think I know where we are in relation to everything else. And so Ted took the Howling Caves, what we call Plunger Town map, and then rescaled it as he just described. And he dragged the entire thing, selected all of it, and dragged it over to the Druid's Retreat map and attempted to do his level best to have it line up. Right? So
I'm not certain it's perfect, but it's good enough.
Yeah. Yep. And that's all you really need. Good enough. Right?
Yeah.
What is it? Better is the
better is the enemy of good.
Yeah, better is the enemy of good enough. Yeah. So that can all be done on any VTT. This is not something that only Miro can do,
Yeah.
right? Now, what we
Yeah.
like Miro for is the fact that I can have all of these maps, these highly detailed maps, and we suffer no lag whatsoever. That's the big plus for Miro.
It's astonishing how smooth it's working.
Yeah, and
Because I'm
knock
still
on
using
wood.
Owlbear in my other game, and it's starting to hit a bit of a slog on that map. So
Yeah, and to be fair to the VTTs out there, like we said, this is sort of a lost art. So yes, you can do it. The capability is there. They have those drawing functions, and you can just draw anything you want on a blank sheet of paper, digital
right.
paper. But it's that is not their primary intent of design. Their primary intent is to host battle maps, right? Like 5e and
Yeah.
Pathfinder 2e battle maps, 5-foot square battle maps where you're moving tokens around and all that sort of stuff, right? That is not what we're doing here. We're doing macro dungeon level sort of drawing as we go. And I would back a Kickstarter in a hot second for any VTT that was actually tailored around true old school play that included player mapping. No one's done that. So if you've got programming knowledge out there, do it because I will I will help fund that. That would be amazing. But Miro's been doing the trick for us. But
Yeah.
these lessons that we're gonna, or these kind of tips and techniques that we're gonna share with you, can be applied anywhere. So what we thought we would do is talk about the tips and techniques that Ted and I use to communicate this stuff.
Yeah.
How Ted uses the Miro tools, which are very similar to any other drawing tools in any other VTT, to quickly and accurately map what he's laying down, and how I convey information in sort of like the tiered order in which I give information, and how we
Yeah.
do it online. And like we said, we are not masters of this. We just feel that we're one of the very few places on YouTube that actually does show some iteration of this. So it's not like we're saying our way or the highway, like this is the only way to do it, but this is what we do. It can certainly be done better. And if you guys have your own tips and techniques, please share them in the comments below. So what we thought we'd
Yeah.
do is go over that. And what I would do is I have my own published, I didn't write it, but I have a map that Ted has not seen from a different module, an OSC module. Ted has not seen it. And I thought that we would just I would deliver the information and have Ted map it, and we'll talk through like what we're doing as Ted actually genuinely tries to map what I'm laying down here. Sound like a plan?
It does. I wanted to just point out one thing, which is when we, sort of switched to Miro, I spent probably 4 hours down in the basement on my computer, learning the tools, learning how to use it. And you pick up the tool quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, there's the pen. Hey, I can change the color of the pen, yada, yada. It takes time to make it move swiftly so that I can map fast enough to not cause everyone to fall asleep watching the video.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So that took some practice, and hopefully it's moving at a good pace for viewers. I think it's working fine. And I'm sure that would be true of any interface you're using. You would need to have some time practicing what you're doing.
Yeah, you got to learn. It's like any piece of software. You got to learn it. You don't have to be like. There's a ton of functionality of Miro that we haven't even delved into because it's not meant for role playing games.
Right.
But Ted knows way more than I do about the functionality of this now. Even though I'm the one that introduced it to the group. But it's a good point. Like, you've got to have the player buy-in. The players have to be willing to kind of jump in and do it. There's nothing easier than actually just doing a hand drawn on graph paper. That just takes no skill. You just pick it up and start to do it. But yes, there are some rudimentary tools that you've got to learn how to use here in Miro in order to get it done.
Yeah.
So you can see here that I have expanded the normal view of Miro. I usually don't share all of the controls on either side, the toolbars and everything on our normal stream, but I do here so that you can see what Ted is doing. Ted, wave your cursor at the folks at home there so they know what to look for there. Yeah, so that's Ted. So wherever Ted is going, that's what you want to kind of follow what Ted is doing.
That's just a rule for life, really.
Yeah, really. So so Ted, just so you know, I'm going to zoom in for the audience so that they can see the actual square lines. I'm always going to keep the legend in frame. So you're probably going to want to start mapping like kind of towards the right of the legend. Okay.
Right. Okay. So about in here, would that be good, John?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great. And what scale are we using today, John?
Well, we're going to do 5-foot squares for this one, which is different than what
Ooh.
you you're used to in Arden Bull, which is 10 foot. And for you modern role players out there, you're probably quite comfortable with 5-foot squares. So first thing, Ted, why don't you talk a little bit about your creation of the legend there and what it took to kind of do that, put that together?
Yeah, so that happened during my practice phase so what I did to practice was I decided to just create a dungeon. I figured there's no better way to, like, I could scribble lines and draw shapes, and I could draw an amusing wizard and do something embarrassing to him, and I'd learn how to use my mouse and the pen. But in order to learn how to map a dungeon, I needed to make a dungeon, and I wanted to make it complicated with lots of features. It needed to have statues and traps and secret doors and various things like that. So after the first few doors I drew it, then I realized, well, this is, why am I drawing it every time? Right. And so I started just, you can select the door and copy it and paste it and drag it around and so on. And so then I just said, let's just have a key so that when Matt is mapping, he's using the same symbols and methodology as I am. Mm-hmm. And that was a big deal, actually, because, I think if two people draw the same dungeon separately, they're not communicating, you would find two very different maps.
Absolutely.
And in order to maintain some degree of continuity, Matt and I using the same language was key. So the key, right now is probably not everything that you might want on a key.
No, but you'll add to it. Yeah.
I've added a couple of things too. We added stairs to it. We added teleportation circles to it. Mm-hmm. We added found corpse to it. That was Matt's idea. That was a really good one, actually.
Mm-hmm. Sadly enough, a lot of
them. I suppose that I could color code them for, definitely dead and possibly going to reanimate later. Right. I don't know. You got a lot of options here. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But statue and secret door and door have been the three that I use a lot. Mm-hmm. And then I have enjoyed using these arrows, for making sure that I indicate which direction a set of stairs goes, or like a good example would be actually, John, if you zoom into AV Club's secret entrance at the bottom, there is the dungeon I made up. If you want to highlight on that.
Sure.
And you can see I used arrows to direct the traffic flow and which way the stairs went. And I added these little, clouds and text fields and things like that.
This is a good example. If I can just interrupt real quick, like you can see that Ted here has copied and pasted that exact same legend on the left-hand side there. Yeah. And then what's really useful about having a key like this is, unlike a physical key, you can actually highlight any of these symbols that he's made and just duplicate them straight from the key and just drag, or maybe not.
I can't right now because we flattened this thing somehow, and I'm not sure how that happened.
Okay, but normally, yes. Let's go back to
the. Somewhere else, I could do it.
Well, let's
go down to.
Let's go to the original one here, the mapping tutorial.
Okay. So basically, I can select it like that. You can see that, and then you don't copy it; you duplicate it. Command D on a Mac, and then you just drag it over. But because we're using a 5-foot square scale, I might want to make that a little bigger. And just for anyone who's using Miro, I will point out that your control over the refinement of a size depends a lot on how zoomed in you are. So if you zoom way in on your detail, you have a lot more control over the size. It's probably got something to do with just how it interprets pixels on your screen. If you're zoomed way out away from the map, you don't have much fine control. You zoom way in, you have a lot of fine control.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And I now see zooming in, that's a really crappy looking trapdoor, but that's all right.
That's all you need. The job. Yeah. And this is a good point too. In Miro, the grid lines that you're seeing here is just an image file. So there's no snapping to these particular grid lines.
Yes.
Miro itself, the overall board, I'm going to zoom all the way out here. Okay. Give you guys this is a macro view of everything that my players can see, basically the home of the Halls of Arden campaign. And I mean, I'm using barely anything. I'm going to zoom way out. So this is the entire board. It's massive. And this has a point grid set on it. I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully with this 4K recording you can. But those points you can snap to on Miro. But within a given image file that I've created here, which is just a grid image, you cannot snap to these actual grids. So just be aware of that. But we actually find that a little bit better because there's so many anomalous sort of corridors and things like that. Like not everything is like Arcantian stonework that has right angles, right? There's a lot of weird caverns and things like that. So snapping is of minimal value in a lot of situations for dungeon mapping. So don't sweat it.
Yeah, it was nice in Owlbear. Worked great.
Yeah.
In this, what we use is something, if you're looking at, I think your viewers should be seeing the toolbar on the left there.
Yep, indeed.
The pen tool has a few options. You've got a pen, a highlighter, and then smart drawing. And smart drawing is what I've been using for all the mapping because I discovered that it can do some cool stuff. So first of all, because it's not snapping to, what I'll do is if I'm drawing a corridor, John says, okay, it's 10 feet wide. I'll draw a line. Are you seeing that, John?
I am. Yep.
And I'll draw another line. And I've drawn them on that gray grid, but of course, it's not really there. Now what I can do is I go to my select tool and I can select that line because it's smart. It's got anchor points. And it does that sometimes, and I don't know why. And I can stretch it out. And then John says, oh, but actually that room is a weird diamond shape. And I say, hey, that's no problem. Mm-hmm. What is it doing and why is it doing that? I don't know. And then boom, I've made a room that's a weird diamond shape. Yep. And then John said, well, that's not the diamond shape I meant. And then I can adjust it, until it's what he meant.
Yeah. So you can basically on any given line that you draw, you can add points. And they're basically like nodes, and then you can basically pull and stretch those however you want. And of course, if things are just too unwieldy, you can just erase everything and start over again. And this happens quite frequently because...
Yeah, it happens a lot.
It does. It happens a lot. It is what it is. Oftentimes I'll make a mistake, or Ted will make it, like if I'll say like it's a 20 by 40 room, Ted will just quickly mark that in, and then suddenly I'll be like, and there's an exit on the west side, and there's a corridor that goes around to the east side. And so he's got to open up all these different egresses out of there, and it takes a lot of work. So
it's not so bad with doors because you can tell the door to be forward, and it'll just hide the line that you've inadvertently put there. And I've done a few little items on the maps here and there where I was creatively playing with drawing some lines and then making parts of them opaque and parts transparent to simulate having some particular shape. Mm-hmm. And it hides lines. It also hides the grid line that you're over, unfortunately, but it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. That's a key thing, though, is that you can layer objects as well. So you can push things to the back or bring them to the front, just like you do in photo editing software, which can be really helpful as well. All right, so let's get into some of these tips and techniques with this map, huh? All right, so audience out there you can see the map. This is from the upcoming Old School Essentials Adventure Anthology, Volume 2. Hoping Ted is not familiar with this, because I know Ted was a Kickstarter backer.
I've backed it. I have it. I have not opened it.
Okay.
Because I have a lot of things in my life. There you go.
I figured that not a lot of people have seen this map. If you are at all sensitive to spoilers, be aware that this contains spoilers for the adventure called what's it called? Barrow of the Bone Blackguards, which is by Chance Dudenak, and it's one of the small adventures in the adventure anthologies, which is coming out soon. And it has all the maps are fantastic in these anthologies, and they're all relatively small. So we're not going to map this entire thing, of course, but we just thought it would be a good example because you can see the map pretty evident, and it shouldn't be, and it's also very sort of geometric, so it won't be too much of a pain in the ass for Ted. Okay, so
I'm ready, sir.
Let's do it. So just a real quick framing thing. This is a barrow in the woods, similar to the Winter's Daughter one, but quite larger. And it was rumored that it was a large tomb for fallen soldiers in a battle way back in the day. And adventurers have heard rumors that there is singing and cavorting being heard from within the within the tomb. So adventurers have been called in to go check it out and stop that from happening. So
I
there
can see where it
is,
upsets the locals.
yes, exactly. So the adventurers arrive, and there is a 10-foot wide opening into the barrow mound. You're coming in from the south, and a rock that used to cover the barrow to keep it closed away has been rolled to the side, exposing a 10-foot wide opening into a chamber beyond.
So this must be a fairly large rock. All right, something like that.
That's about right.
Perhaps?
Yeah, it's about a 10-foot wide rock covering a 10-foot wide opening. Although that rock has been shunted to the west.
Okay, which means that I need to put my opening. You said a 10-foot wide opening?
10-foot wide opening, yeah. And it goes directly, it goes in and heads to the north into darkness.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So, yeah, so you can see that's just the basics right there, as I kind of set it up. One key, I'm probably going to realize techniques as we kind of just talk to each other, but one thing that I always try to do is speak in directions. I don't speak in left and right and up and down, because that can quickly get confusing depending on the perspective of what you're talking about, whether you're talking about the perspective of the map or the perspective of where the characters are, things like that. If I say that, for instance, Mort sees something to his left, it all depends on which direction Mort is facing, right? So it's much better and more clear for the mapper to actually, as the referee, tell the mapper directions using cardinal directions when at all possible. So that's why I say they are entering from the south. The entrance goes into darkness, going to the north. Okay. All right. So let's take a look here. There are streams of mist that are slithering out, and the whole place stinks of decay. And you can hear the distant echoes of song coming from inside as well. I'm going to get too into this module. We're actually going to start playing it. Don't want to do that. It has nothing to do with mapping. Okay.
I'm ready. I have Mort here. You go.
Yeah. So pretend like I'm giving all the rest of the really cool narrative description, but we're going to focus on here is just the mapping. All right.
Okay.
So Ted arrives at the entrance and pulls out his scroll case and whips out his plume and starts to map. Okay. You can see going forward, you light your lantern in order to illuminate what you can. This is another key thing: is you never want to give more description than what their light sources can give. If you I'm going to be stopping all the time now that I think about all these cool things, but it's an essential thing that you, if you forego the character's use of light, then you're basically saying that does not matter in the campaign, or you're going to get called out by the players when you make it matter, and they're going to be able to say, well, it didn't matter back when we were mapping. Right. So try to keep in mind what the light source is, who is holding it, and how far it goes at all times. It's a key part of resource management in old school play, and it's definitely a key thing that the referee has to keep in his mind at all times. So with in old school essentials, torches and lanterns have a 30-foot radius. So I would only describe what they can see in 30 feet from where they are. Yeah, Ted.
Well, I would say, yeah. I think that's absolutely right, and I'm glad you do it that way. I on occasion in a 40-foot room, you've just given us the dimensions. I think because it's just madness to. Okay, I creep forward 10 feet to discover the other side of the wall. It's a lot simpler for everyone sometimes to fudge it a little bit.
Definitely,
you can probably see the wall. It's not like that's a total line of invisibility at 30 feet. Yeah. But I know in big caverns and stuff, you have not given the dimensions till we've circled the room and
right. Yeah, absolutely. It also it gives, I think it also provides a sense of what else is there, and it kind of pushes players to want to explore more or to step into the room where normally they would be extra super cautious, right? Like if they can't get the full dimensions, that's an automatic like desire to step in so they can at least get what and then they step into the trap and it's all good. So
yeah.
So yeah, keep that in mind. Always keep light radiuses in mind. Don't be afraid to fudge it when necessary if it's really close. But in large chambers, don't give them everything. Make them step in. In this case, this is the case. So what I would tell Ted is that there is a 10-foot wide corridor that goes directly north to 30 feet to the limits of your lantern light, and there does not seem to be a wall at the end of that. So it continues on into darkness past 30 feet. So Ted's going to draw 30 feet and leave it open ended. Now Ted's already jumped the gun though, because I haven't fully explained that there are
Classic.
yeah, classic 3d6 down the line.
All right. What did I miss, John? Tell me.
Give me a second, and I'll check.
Also,
here.
I don't know. Are you seeing this weird line thing that I get where it jumps off and goes?
No.
You're not seeing that. Okay. I'm getting this weird artifact where the line is trying to connect to something 6 miles away and just shoots off. And if I just wait a second, it corrects itself. But I'm not sure what you're seeing. But if you do see that,
No.
pay no mind.
Yeah, it seems to be fine. Okay, so lining the eastern and western parts of this corridor are burial alcoves at regular intervals. Yes. So after 5 feet, there are 5-foot square burial alcoves to the east and west, basically facing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then it skips 5 feet, and then there's another set, and it skips 5 feet, and there's another set.
Now here is a great. See, is it doing it? Do you see it?
No.
Did you see that?
No.
No. Okay, good. It's just on my screen then. So here's a great example of where I am not going to get fussy about drawing 5-foot alcoves with that snap line. I'm just going to go, and I might change color to make it indicate that it's a niche rather than like a, because I'm assuming at the floor level, the wall is continuous, that these niches are like a few feet above the floor. They're actually a little niche, right?
They're actually niches, so you can walk right into them.
Yeah. So I draw them in green, something like that. And they don't need to be pretty. They just need to tell me that there's a niche there. And is this an accurate portrayal of nichery?
So it's actually not. So it's actually after 5 feet is the first set. And they are 5-foot square niches. Don't forget these.
Oh, I'm on a 5-foot square map, not a 10-foot square map.
Yep, I had a feeling that's what you were sort of thinking.
And I also only drew a 15-foot corridor instead of a 30-foot corridor because I forgot we're on a 5-foot scale already.
Mm-hmm. And the niches themselves are actually 5 feet, so they're actually whole squares.
Oh, okay, fine. That is also easily fixed. Just delete that. Go back to my pen. So like that?
Yep, exactly. And then it skips 5 feet, and then there's another set.
All right. And then I could just duplicate this and just drag that up there and drag that up there. And I could duplicate it. Oh, jeez. Price more. And in Miro, I have a lovely little rotate feature, and I'll just turn them around.
Yep.
Slip them into place.
And you can do that in any VTT too. Any object that you have that usually has handles that you can just simply rotate. So copying and pasting, duplicating, transforming, using basic transform tools are your best friend instead of having to draw everything single-handedly. Draw one thing and then duplicate it across every time. Every many times you need it on the map. Yeah, it did.
Now this brings up something I think interesting, which is at in our comment sections on YouTube, we've had a lot of people asking, what is Ted using to draw? And for a while, I was using a Wacom tablet, and I abandoned it for two reasons. One was real estate on my desk. I just didn't have anywhere to put it. I've got a keyboard and microphone and a glass of scotch and all my notes and my lamp and my monitor. There's no room.
Right.
The other was that I bought the cheapest one possible to see if I liked using it, and I do. I'm not here to endorse or disparage Wacom, but it's not the kind where I'm drawing on the screen. It's just a blank piece of plastic, and the disconnect between trying to draw, here while I'm looking here was a huge distraction. If you've got one of those really nice, Wacoms, or I forgot the other one, Cintiq, one of those where you're drawing right on the screen, you may find drawing is the way to go instead of trying to use all these little tips and tricks I'm giving you. This is all mouse-based stuff that I'm talking about at this point, because I'm not using that Wacom anymore. I'm doing it all with the mouse, and it's just a lot easier for me. and I had to have the mouse on the desk anyway. Yada yada
Yeah.
yada. But if I had a Cintiq, man, I would be drawing this stuff. And
Yeah,
it would
and
be
this
sexy.
and it's you don't need anything more than a mouse. Like that's really
No,
all you need. Like we said, like
absolutely.
you do not need to be a professional artist to be able to do this sort of stuff. The tools are built and made so that anyone can pick them up. You just need a little bit of practice, just getting used to the user interface, and you're set. You're good to go. But yeah, Ted's right. If you do, if you've got the money and the desk space, go for one of those fancy Cintiqs because those things are pretty sweet, and the experience will be pretty seamless compared to actually drawing on real graph paper. So,
Yeah.
but that's luxury level. So don't feel pressured to ever need that. A mouse is going to serve you just fine. Yeah.
Doing it
Okay,
all with
so
the mouse works great.
there are a number of interesting things in the niches. Nothing's going to attack you though, but just so you can see what Ted has done here is that every VTT and Miro itself has a text tool as well. So if there is something interesting to note in the niches or anything on the dungeon, you can simply quickly write a note directly on to the map itself. Miro is nice because you can make sticky notes as well to actually draw the attention to it. There's Ted's actually made one right there. And you can resize it and connect it to other sticky notes and all this sort of cool mind mapping sort of stuff that we haven't really delved into. But for any VTT, you can just use the text tool. We used it in Owlbear a lot as well, and draw and make notes to your heart's content. So nothing happens here. Ted's character moves with his lantern northwards so that he can scope out the rest of it, and he can see that after the last set of niches, it goes on for another 5 feet before it actually terminates in a set of double doors that straddles the entire width of the corridor.
Okay.
And it's not going to stop
actually,
Ted's
so
character,
here's
but
what
there
I'm
is
going to do is I'm going to use that little anchor feature. I've got my corridor. Now I'm going to go over and I'm going to grab a double. You said a double door?
double door. Yep.
Boop.
So
I'm
you
going to
can
grab.
Ted
Hey,
already
double
had
door.
that set up in his legend. So any sort of symbol that you haven't made yet, you can simply draw it out real quick, add it to your legend, and then you can just duplicate it from that point forward. You only ever have to draw these things one time. And then he can transform that to there. So you can see there that he actually put it onto a higher layer than the actual drawing of the corridor itself. So it lays on top of the end of that corridor. And if he wanted to, he could actually stretch out those double doors to span the entire width of the corridor.
Yeah. Well, I think, I also actually had to make it opaque. I was able to.
Is that what you did? Okay.
Yeah, I brought it forward and realized that the key is not actually opaque.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then I'm just going to close this little gappy there because we don't want any viewers thinking I'm not meticulous with attention to detail. Look at that. Okay.
Yeah. Now, Ted, once again, is being, as you said, meticulous. You do not have to be this perfect.
No. I wore a tie for this, you see. So
Yes.
I have a certain image to uphold here.
Yeah, I am blessed as a referee to have very diligent and skilled players in all arenas, and Ted spoils us by creating excellent maps. Do not expect your players to be able to do as good of a job as Ted has done out of the gate. Like I said, it takes practice, and you do not need this level of sophistication. I mean, do we really call this sophisticated? I'm tooting Ted's horn.
It's totally sophisticated. Look,
yeah, it does. It takes skill. Better than I could do.
I'll even do this. Is this sophisticated enough for you, John?
Yeah, he's got the pinky out. Look out. So I think the key lesson, what I'm trying to say here is you want to map as accurately as you can that still allows you to keep pace with what else is going on in the group. If you find yourself becoming a wallflower because you're spending too much time mapping and like your character never says anything or never does anything because you're fine tuning every little detail, you're going to miss out on things that are going on in the group. For one thing, and you're not engaged in a positive manner. You're only engaged in one aspect of play, which is map making. So only do enough mapping that just allows you to sort of keep pace with everybody else. Everyone else is still going to appreciate your efforts, and you're going to be very proud of what you did in the end, anyway. So
I do find on complicated rooms, like the room we did. Let's see, it would have been session 45, I think, with the room that had like 20 statues in it.
Mm-hmm.
I did get into the weeds on trying to get that room laid out and get it in the right position and stuff. And there was things happening that I was only half aware of.
Yeah.
So it's an easy trap to fall into. Generally, I do try to like get the room roughly laid out as I'm listening to John. And then if I'm being honest, then when David is doing something crazy, then I can go back in and
Take the time.
put a few refinements on the room because there's no stopping him. So I'll just let him do his thing and I'm going to go in and tweak some things. But
sure. Yeah. And you should, as Ted does this with me, and you should also do it with your own referees. If you're overwhelmed, if the referee gives too much information too quickly or is confusing in any sort of manner, just stop him, stop them, and ask them to clarify and to take the time. And oftentimes, if you have really cool players, they're going to jump in and try to help you iron out the details as well. So take the time. Everyone's going to be willing to stop for a moment so you get it right, and don't be afraid just to make sure that you're understanding things clearly. Okay, so
John, are there corpses in the niches?
There are no corpses in the niches. They're just scraps of linen and stuff like that, but they're defaced reliefs of warriors fighting, and they're scribbled over with profanity. However, on the northern door, though, there is a big warning that says, all who enter will be cursed. That's not going to stop Ted's adventure, though.
So this is the kind of thing I do like to record. All who enter will be cursed.
Yep.
And I find that when there's inscriptions on the walls, it's nice to write them down right on the map, partly because it reminds us that it was there, what it said word for word. Sometimes that's really important. And it helps you differentiate one room from another. You know, you can say, oh, the cursed room, it's right over the door. Oh yeah, I remember, so
100%. It's almost more effective than having that same note written down in a note document, because you're associating the note with an actual space rather than in just a list of notes that you've been taking for the session. So it's like, where was it where we saw that one inscription, and you just look at the map and you're like, oh yeah, there it is.
I don't do it all the time. Some of the inscriptions are so long it's
especially
impossible
in
to transcribe them. Yeah.
Okay, so
all right, so I'm going to open the door, John.
The double doors presents no obstacles, and you open it up. It opens up into a large east to west corridor, also 10 feet wide, that heads out 30 feet in either direction. So you can
east-west corridor, 10 feet wide, goes in either direction
for 30. Don't forget, you only drew 15 feet there.
Yeah, I know it. I'm just getting it sort of laid out so that then I can go back in with my little magic. As soon as I can grab it. There. Jeez. I really don't know what is going on with my computer. And I'm glad you're not seeing what my line does, because it's super annoying.
I did add a layer of transparency over the grid map, Ted. I don't know if that's causing things to...
It might be. It's keying off of something somewhere. It's like, oh, he definitely wants to connect to that.
Oh,
and I don't know what it is.
That's a Miro specific thing, though, folks. So don't sweat it.
It's trying to create connections between, different things that are on the screen,
and it's doing that too, partially because Ted is using the what's it called, the smart drawing tool. You can just use like a regular pen and just draw freehand, but this allows Ted. This allows Ted to draw very straight lines, but you don't have to draw straight lines, right? You just draw freehand, go for it. So what you can see, what I did there is I didn't tell Ted in reference where he was appearing in reference to the rest of the corridor. I just said he opens up the doors and there's an east-west corridor and it goes off for 30 feet in either direction. He has no sense of, is he in the middle of the corridor, right? He doesn't know, right? So I just did it. First of all, I gave it by the cardinal directions, and then I described how much he could see based upon his torchlight radius, assuming that he swings the torch or the lantern left and right. I always make those base assumptions that you're doing basic exploratory stuff without me having to ask. That's just going to bog things down. I just assume that anyone with light is going to be shining that light in every possible direction to see what's going on, right? Unless they tell me otherwise, basically.
I think that's a fair assumption when you're in the exploration mode. I can see where there's times where you might not do it that way, but we're in exploration mode. Of course, we're looking around.
Yeah, you're looking around, and
Why worry
that's a
about it?
good tip too for OSR play as well. Is that the movement rates in the turn sequence is set up that way because there's a default assumption that the adventurers are being adventurers. They're being careful, and they're trying not to make noise. They're moving very slowly. They're mapping as they go, and they're unless they tell the referee differently, you can just assume that this is happening. So there's no need for stealth checks and perception checks and all that sort of stuff. It's just there's a default assumption that these are capable adventurers, even at level 1, and that they know what they're doing. They're trying their best to be careful, and you should give appropriate descriptions for dungeon rooms based upon that assumption when you're giving them what their 5 senses can pick up.
I'd just like to say that the lie in that statement will be clearly evident in episode 46.
Possibly.
Where somebody, I name no names, was not careful at all.
It happens to the best of us. This is how lessons are learned, as I always say. So, okay, what do we got here? So there's a cobweb festooned hall. There are pottery fragments on the ground. Doesn't really matter though. So let's just continue mapping. We're not actually playing this module. So would you like to go west or east?
East. I'm going to go east because if I go west, I'm going to run into my key. So I'm going to go east.
Good plan. Okay. So the corridor goes east. Let's see.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do as a referee is I'm going to give him the entire length of the corridor from the point of the double doors, even though he's mapped already part of it. 5, 10, 15, right. 20, 25, 30, 35. So the corridor goes on for another 35 feet.
Okay, now the first question I would have is that from, if you can see my cursor, is that from this point?
Yes.
Okay. And so anyone who's been listening to us for a while has found that this is probably the number one problem John and I have is like he says corridor goes 30 feet and then there's a turn. And I think, okay, 1, 2, 3 squares. And then in the 4th square, there's a turn. And what he means is the turn is in the 3rd square. So I have to make sure I understand where he's starting from and what he's counting.
Yeah, we still haven't figured out like a good way to actually convey that. We should probably just actually think about that and come up with a decision. But we struggle through as we do. But it can be tough. Yeah, so Ted is
I add 5 feet 20, to that.
35. So you're good. Yeah, so that's 35 feet. At which point, okay, the corridor doesn't end, but to the south, it actually turns a corner into a 5-foot wide passageway, which about like 2 feet into that passageway is completely choked with a cave in. Like there was some sort of a passageway there, but it's no longer there.
Okay, so here's a good one for the regular pen, and I'll just draw some rubble and then a quick note that says cave in. And if we decide to excavate that, then maybe I'll erase that and whatever, move it around, something like that. But right now it's totally choking the corridor.
Yep, completely choking the corridor.
Yeah.
And then the corridor basically goes on for another 5 feet before it actually hits a wall.
And nothing to the north of that corridor.
There is something to the north, actually. So
how is there?
Yeah, there is so the corridor narrows to half its width. So it's only a 5-foot wide corridor that goes directly north from that point.
Right.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. Okay, so here's another great example of what John has described makes sense to him because he has a map in front of him. It made 0 sense to me. So my first question is, was there something on the north opposite the cave-in? And you said yes.
No, what I meant was at the point where the wall is on the eastern side, at the eastern end of the corridor, it goes north. It goes north from that point, and it's only 5 feet wide.
So do I get something like
yes?
See, now do you see that line?
I see that line. Yeah.
I let go of it. It's trying to. Oh, I see what it's trying to do. It's trying to grab the edge of the map. I don't know why.
Weird.
I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, so this is doing this. Is that right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's going north. However, so it shoots north for 5 foot wide corridor going as far as you can possibly see for 30 feet. However, there is a passageway heading east right at the point where it turns north. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So what I need to do is draw it like something like this.
Yes, that's correct.
And then, okay.
Yep.
Like so.
You got it. Exactly.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, you can see like where we have to kind of stop each other and kind of figure things out a little bit, but I'm always consistently using the cardinal directions. I give it to him. Usually if I can, I give it to him in feet. I think that just adds to the realism rather than giving it to Ted in squares. I think it just helps to kind of orient people with distances as far as the characters in the actual space itself is better to give it in feet rather than squares.
Shouldn't we be using our Kantian feet though? I think like or stayed or ulnas or something like that.
This is true, yeah, but my job's hard enough already. All right, so yeah, it continues off into darkness. So it looks like when you're at that eastern corridor and you shine your lantern into the eastern corridor, it looks like it only goes for that 5 feet before it opens up into a wider space. However, when you swing your lantern to the north, it continues to go off into darkness for as far as you can see. So it goes at least 30 feet.
All right, so I don't need to draw that full distance because I'm going to go east for now. So I'm going to go step into that 5 foot square and observe the room without entering it.
So in the midst of that small corridor there, you can see that it opens up into a perfect square room. And that room is 15 feet by 15 feet. And you are entering in directly in the middle of the western wall.
As I surmised I might be. Okay.
So this is a baseline description. You've probably heard me say it a bunch of times for a very simple room. This is our first room we sort of described here. It's you can see that I gave him the basic shape of the room first. So Ted has that in his mind. I tell him it's square. I don't tell him any dimensions. I tell him it's square. So he's got that in his mind. And then I tell him what the actual dimensions are. So I say it's a square room. It's 15 by 15. And then the only way that Ted can determine where he should lay down that 15 by 15 is to tell him where the characters are entering from in relation to that description, right? So you always have to tell them you're entering in this many squares or this many feet north or south or east or west from a certain wall, right? So I say you're entering in directly in the middle of the western wall, and that basically pinpoints it for Ted. And that's about as easy as it gets for dungeon rooms. Square room, middle of the wall, easy, right? So this is a good point for me to sort of tell you what I feel is like the best way to convey information to players as they enter new rooms, especially to the mapper, first of all, is to start with the overall room dimensions like I just did. Then you want to, and what I actually recommended this to Ted in the last session is that for strange rooms that may have a lot of weird features or weird exits or shapes or something like that, it might also, I recommend actually jotting down the notes the ref gives you on a piece of paper first. Or maybe writing it in text on Miro or something like that, and then actually finishing the drawing once the ref has given the entire description. If you're mapping simultaneously as the referee is giving the description, there's a chance that you may have to redo a lot of your work. Is the point that I'm trying to make here? This room is not that.
I don't mind doing.
Yeah,
it's not a big deal.
It's all about your tolerance level. But if you don't want to fall behind, it might be a good idea just to like take notes. Don't have to do it with a square room like this, but. So first of all, what you want to do is, given the overall room dimensions, then you want to add the dimension anomalies to, that may be occurring in those rooms. So if you get a room that perhaps that, like if this was a square room, but it actually had rounded corners, this would be the point where you tell them that it has rounded corners, right? So you would say it's a 15 by 15 foot room, and then you would be like, wait a second, Ted, don't draw it yet. Just be aware that all of the corners actually have rounded corners, and then they take a compensate for that. Then what you want to do is you continue to drill down into further and further detail. So then once Ted has mapped out the basic dimensions of the room, he may be done. But depending on what he may want to add, this would be the point where you would talk about the room details. So the furniture, the dressing, the items in the room, the detritus in the room, where things are located, statues and pillars, inscriptions, all that sort of stuff, right? This is where as Ted just did, you can draw from your legend and start placing things down, right? Or if you've got an artistic bent and you actually want to draw the detritus or where a weapons rack is or where a shattered dresser is or something like that, you can certainly do that, right? Or you could just write a text note down or something like that. But you want to leave that to the last point, and that is not something that you necessarily should be adding to a map. It's only if you feel it would be useful as a reference later on. And then the very last thing that you would want to convey to a mapper is inhabitants. Who's in the room, right? You can make the case that might be the very first thing you might want to convey.
Yeah.
And I often will, like if it's something where the inhabitants are going to be hostile, or it's a dilemma that the characters are going to have to deal with immediately, where they cannot size up what the dimensions of the room are. I'll just skip right to the action, right? Like, you know, you walk into a room and it's filled with baboons. There's 6 of them. What do you do? You know, and then if they ask me questions about the dimension of the room, I'll give it to them, but I won't give them any details because they're in the middle of a scrum now, right? They can't parse that kind of level of detail. But all things being equal, and you're in a peaceful room that doesn't seem to have any sort of threat, that's the order I would do it. So start with room dimensions, dimension anomalies, the details of the room, and then the inhabitants. Right. Okay. So
if we're just sticking with mapping,
yeah,
and there's no features of this room that I would need to map, should we just keep going north then?
Yeah, you want to keep going north?
Okay.
Okay. So you go north. As you exit this room, you're going to go north for another 15 feet. And after that 15 feet, so at the 20-foot mark, there is another 5-foot wide passageway going east.
So, right here?
Correct.
Okay. And is it, well, you said 5-foot passage going east.
5-foot passage east, and it opens up into an exact duplicate of the southern room.
Okay, so here's a cool thing that Miro can do, and probably others of this sort as well. You can lasso something and temporarily turn it into a thing that you can duplicate. And then I might need to actually fine tune it down a little bit. That's pretty good.
That's pretty cool.
And look, didn't quite work perfectly, but close enough. Save me a little time.
Save some time, yeah. So I know that you listeners out there and our viewers can't actually see Ted actually doing the actual looping. I can't see it either, but just be aware that
that's a good point.
Each individual line that Ted is drawing, or each individual object, they're all separate little. They're their own individual, not files, objects. They're their own objects, and they can all be individually or collectively grouped together or selected by just kind of lassoing them around like Ted just did. So you could just select as many as you want, and then just do a Control-D to duplicate them and then move them around like Ted did. Yeah.
So the lasso's pretty evident how it works if you've ever used, you know, any Photoshop or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of deal. You just lasso it, and it takes everything inside that lasso and turns it into an object that you can duplicate.
Yep. And much simpler than like Photoshop. So, yeah.
And I'm curious. I just noticed something which I hadn't noticed before. When I duplicated it, the room that I had drawn was 2 separate smart lines, and it duplicated that exactly. It does not create a new, different thing. It really does duplicate what I selected.
Oh, cool. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
So I can still manipulate the 2 separate lines as separate lines. If this room, for example, had one little different feature, it's a little easier for me to add it in than having to like erase a section of line or something like that.
Gotcha. Yeah,
okay. Yeah. So I've determined that there's a second room. And it's pretty boring. So I'm going to go back out in the hallway.
Back out in the hallway, you can see that it goes on for another 5 feet before there is actually a 5-foot wide passageway that leads to the west.
Now, does it lead to the west?
Right at the point where you're at.
So it starts going west in there, or go one more square?
Nope, you've already gone the square. So right there.
Okay, so I need to shorten this line.
No. You right where you had it.
I did have it right.
Yep. Right where you have it is where it turns west. So it goes
like
5 feet from the eastern passageway north. There is a passageway to the west, which is what you did.
Does this corridor continue north or just entirely turn?
It continues north. I should tell you that too. Yeah. So there is a 5-foot wide passageway that breaks away to the left.
So I'm going to draw a little smart line. Okay, so is that correct?
That's correct. Your lantern light shows that it opens up into a much larger chamber than the chambers that you've been seeing to the east. There is stinks of mold. Okay, let me just get a bead on this guy. All right, so your lantern light shows that you are in a rectangular chamber that is larger north to south than it is east to west. So it is precisely 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. It is 25 feet north to south, and it is 15 feet east to west. You are coming in directly in the middle of the eastern wall.
Okay. So middle of the eastern wall, 25 feet north to south.
Mm-hmm.
Is that looking good so far?
5, 10, 15, 20. I think you're a little too large there, Ted. 5, 10, 15, 20, 20. It's 25
25 feet.
25 feet. Yeah.
I did 25 feet in each direction.
Yeah.
Oh, the humanity. Easily solved with this smart tool, though, I gotta say. All right. 25. Even goblins make mistakes sometimes.
That's right. I would also tell another key thing that I would try to convey immediately so that Ted doesn't do a lot of work is if there are any doors or egresses out of the room. So far, there haven't been in any of the rooms that I described, but that would definitely be a key thing that you would want to convey immediately. There is a set of tapestries, Ted, that actually cover the entire southern wall. And there are small little alcoves that semicircular niches that hold melted candle stubs that are dotting the western and eastern sides. So for viewers out there, you can probably see that there are on the actual answer key, like the actual map, there is they've drawn in those semicircular niches, and there's a specific amount, like 7 total. Now I'm looking at that, and I'm like, that's going to be kind of a pain in the ass to sort of tell Ted where those are. And so I look at the description, the room description, and I see that the niches themselves, it doesn't really matter how many there are. It just matters that they hold melted candle stubs. So as long as I convey that information, I don't feel the need to give Ted that precise information. So I just could just tell him there are semicircular niches. And if Ted really wants to know, like if they've got some sort of plan for using those niches in some sort of clever manner, then yeah, I'll give it to him. Otherwise, I'll just be like, draw them in, just go for it.
Where are these tapestries you speak of?
The tapestries are lining the entire southern wall, and there are 3 of them.
Oh, southern.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just delete what I was doing there. A tapestry on the southern wall, you say?
Indeed.
3 tapestries?
3 tapestries, all depicting different things. One of them has yellow mold, which would kill your character, but we'll decide that you've seen it and keep away. However, the middle one, Ted, you can see that there is light emanating from underneath one of the tapestries.
Ah, light, you say?
Mm-hmm.
So here might be a good time to grab an arrow, which can sometimes be a little bit, if I'm, I can't deal with it right now, for example, but I want to mark it and I don't want to write light behind this tapestry. I'll just put an arrow and then I'll remember later that there's something about that tapestry.
The point of it.
But in this case, I think I am going to lift the tapestry aside and look and see what's behind there.
So you can see that there is actually a door behind the tapestry, and there is light emanating from the space between the door and the ground. And so it is so Ted is actually putting like a straight up door. You could actually mark this as like technically it's a concealed door. So in the classic modules, they would actually have like a C. It's not technically a secret door. But you could certainly put an S down, whatever, it could be whatever you want. But if you wanted to remember for future reference that this was not something that was readily seen or accessible, you would probably want to mark this with a C for concealed or an S for secret. And this is one of those points where smart players, which Ted is, and David is particularly keen on picking up on this sort of stuff, where they can look at a map. And if I say that there are 3 tapestries on the southern wall only, and you're looking at this map that you guys drew from scratch, you could see that there is appears to be negative space right here, right? That should be very attractive to players to spend some time, spend a couple turns trying to figure out if there's something else going on here, right? And that's all derived based upon the fact that you created this map, which is what's really fun about it, right?
I'm going to use the self-created agency for success here, John, and I'm going to open that door.
Open the door. Okay. So it's locked, but Ted, your guy is now magically a thief and has a skeleton key. So congratulations.
All right. So I'll set down my lantern. I'll open the lock, and I'll open the door, and I'll immediately map what's on the other side.
Nice. Okay. So in a room where, so you would basically assume that almost all dungeon rooms are dark, right? First of all, so always kind of keep that in mind when you're talking about lantern light. But however, you also need to be aware specifically in key descriptions where there is light available in the room already when they come in, because that usually means that all aspects of the room will be immediately visible to the person, and you need to convey that to the players immediately, because that's a huge change in the environment. Right, like darkness is ever present in the dungeon. It provides most of the danger. If you're walking into a room where you know there's going to be light, that needs to be the very first thing that you convey to the players. This room is lit by this. That's the first thing you say, right? So this room is lit by Ted. It is a white marble idol, actually, that's cupping a brazier in its hands, and there is white smokeless flames are actually emanating from the brazier. So it's not like orange flame, it's like white flame. And that's what's providing this light that is illuminating the entire chamber. So
where is this idol located?
So the idol's on the far side of the room. The room itself is a hemisphere. Okay, so first of all, there is a 5-foot long corridor that then opens up into the room.
Okay.
The room itself is 15 feet wide, and the northern wall, which you are entering in from the middle of, is flat. Okay, and then from that flat northern wall is a perfect hemisphere.
Okay, let me try this again here. Okay, so I've got a 5-foot corridor. And a 15-foot wide room, you said?
15-foot wide, and the northern wall is flat, right?
Like so.
And then it is a 20-foot wide north to south, but it's a perfect hemisphere from point to point on the northern wall.
Wait, how wide is it? It's 15 feet wide.
15 feet wide, but the highest, like the furthest point to the south is 20 feet. So you're going to draw.
Door.
Yeah. So no, from the entrance to the room.
Okay. Well, we've got a problem because I don't have enough room there to go.
I'm sorry. It's my bad. I'm thinking 10-foot squares as well. 10 feet. 10 feet.
Okay. Yeah. That makes tons more sense based on my math. Okay. So now this is one of the cool things about Miro is if I do this right, I should be able to use the smart tool to actually draw a hemisphere, and it'll make it pretty good.
Once again, everything that Ted is doing, you can just do by hand and call it a day.
Hey, look at that.
And that looks great.
And then if I want to adjust the shape of that, which I probably do, I can kind of grab a few key anchor points, and
yep, he can make that as perfect as he wants. What he did initially is just fine, like 100% fine. But Ted is just doing he's just adding nodes to at any point and just rounding it out.
Yeah.
And he's got his statue exactly in the right place. So you can see there that this is an oddly shaped room. So you want to give the basic dimensions like at the furthest points. And then what I do is I give Ted like a basic shape, just so he's got that in his head. He's probably going to have to ask me more questions, but at least he has in his head hemisphere from the very start. So he kind of knows what he's working with. You know what I mean?
Right. So the kind of questions I would ask as a player is the ceiling flat, or is it also like hemispherical, or is the floor flat, or is this carved, or is it laid dressed stone? Is it Arcantian stone?
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yep. And as you can see here in my key description, it doesn't give me that information. So a lot of times you have to just kind of lie, come up with a good. Also, oftentimes, and you guys have probably seen this on my screen. Like I'm all about like just being transparent about stuff, and I'll just be like, module doesn't tell me. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's whatever you want it to be. That's sort of like what I do with the doors. Like they open whatever way you want them to open, because no one ever bothers to tell you which way doors open. So whatever's more convenient for you. Anyways, so yeah, this looks like something that you would probably want to interact with. Looks like the gemstones, like the eyes are made out of gemstones and the marble idol. Maybe you want to take them. Who knows?
I totally do, but then I want to get back to mapping.
Right. So he grabs the gems out of the eyes and probably curses himself for all eternity, but he continues blindly.
He's
forward.
already a goblin, so how bad can it be?
Yeah. So let's just get to the end of this northern corridor, and we'll just kind of call it a day here. So you walk back out into the north-south corridor, and you can see that after this.
You know what, John? Mm-hmm. I've got it. Remember, we've got our PC token.
Yeah.
Right. That is what we should use as our reference. I'm just going to put a corpse right there. That's going to be me, because I know I'm going to die soon. Right. You should tell me how many more feet beyond the square I'm in.
Oh yeah, that's a good plan.
We can try that out next time.
Yeah, okay, that's a good plan.
I'm standing here. How many feet ahead of me does this corridor go?
So it goes another 30 feet at least. However, 5 feet after where you're standing currently, there's another passageway east, and it appears to mirror the exact same dimensions as those other square rooms.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So draw that, and then we can go lasso a room again. We're gonna now, so here's an interesting thing. The lasso has grabbed more than I wanted. Let's try that again.
Yeah, we can't see that, but
yeah, interesting. I've still got a lot of learning to do, evidently. I'm going to not lasso things. So Mort's going to walk to right here and tell me about this room. You said it was
it's a mirror, the mirror of all the other rooms to the east. So
okay,
square 15 by 15.
Nothing unusual about it?
No, other than there's different contents, but the basic dimensions are all the same.
Is it loot?
Is it loot? Let's check. Is it loot?
I love the loot.
There's some stone coffers.
Those have loot after you die from zombie. Okay. All right. So then Mort would move back to here, and you would again tell me how many more feet to go and how far my light sees.
So 5, 10, 15, 20. So the corridor goes on from where you are there for another 20 feet before it opens up into a larger rectangular chamber. Okay. So you're coming in from the middle of the southern wall of this rectangular chamber. The chamber itself is 20 feet north to south by 15 feet east to west. You're coming in from the middle of the southern side. However, just so you know, there is a passageway that leads west 5 feet up from the southern end of the room. And I think Ted's on my... See what Ted was doing? I think he's on my wavelength.
Yeah, I'm having some mapping problems. Don't worry. It's something about this map you drew is different than other maps, John, and it's given me some agita.
Of course, on the tutorial.
On the tutorial, but hey, man, that's life. Yep. All right, so did I get that bit correct?
Yes, you got it. So
yeah, so maybe I'll draw a new line right there, and I'll work with this one. And then what I can do is I can connect it like that, if you see that, and then I just grab boink, and I got my room.
Yeah. It's pretty nice, yeah. So you can just add those nodes to actually just kind of shape the room around those nodes.
Yeah.
And in
Which is
addition,
great for like the octagons and the like trapezoids that John's giving me, man. It's great for that.
yeah, that could be a major pain when you've got really odd ones like that. And there is a door that is on the eastern wall, 5 feet down from the northern end.
Eastern wall, 5 feet down from the northern end. So right there.
Yep. And I can tack that on at the end of my description because I know Ted is going to drop a separate object on top of the line. So I know he doesn't need to redraw in order to add doors. So I don't mind like tacking that on at the end of the description. Yeah. So I think that's probably good enough to give people sort of an idea of what we're talking about here. Let me sort of zoom out to kind of get the grand scale of what he's done.
We've got cave-ins, we've got statues, concealed doors, regular doors, niches, nooks, and a giant rock.
Yep. You find a secret door, the whole thing. So obviously you've probably seen elements in Arden Vool that are a lot more complicated than this. I deliberately chose like a very simple sort of layout dungeons just so you can see the basics. Like Ted said, it can be a lot more complicated when you're drawing like trapezoidal, octagonal, and especially for cavern drawings, it can be a real mess. And we had to really think about how we wanted to convey information in that level, the Druid's Retreat, where it was all natural caverns. So in situations like that, where you have very oddly shaped caverns, or corridors or anything like that, where it's like natural stone, where there's like a lot of different verticality and a lot of strange formations and rock formations within given rooms and all that kind of stuff, you need to give the overall dimensions of the room to the mapper, and don't even bother trying to nail down the nitty-gritty details because it's going to be impossible. Like at that point, it's better just to give them a map that with fog of war and expose it if you really want them to see like the exact details. I can guarantee you, let me actually zoom into the Druid's Retreat level here where we had that. So if you take a look at the overall Druid's Retreat level that they've mapped so far, and let me bring up the actual Arden Vool map.
I don't get to look at this.
Yeah, Ted's unfortunately out of the loop here. Let me find it here.
Now I can't even watch this episode.
Skip this part, Ted. Sorry. I'll get off of it real quick. So you can see here that this main corridor, this section right here, this triangular crossroads, maps to the middle of your screen that you're seeing with the main map, right? I'll give it away. It's area 11. So it's at least 11 areas, Ted.
I'm not surprised. It was a complicated level.
But you can see that the way that we did it, and if you've watched these episodes, you probably saw like the techniques we used. Ted's map is not 100% accurate. It's impossible to be because I could not convey every little nook and cranny. And the publishers and the writers of this module don't expect you to do that either. They either expect you to actually use the VTT version without the numbers on it for your players, or they just expect you to convey the information generally. So what I tried to do as far as conveying directions is to give it based upon loose angles, right? We were making jokes about using protractors and stuff like that, but it helped me.
If you have a protractor.
Yeah, if you got a protractor, I know it sounds super geeky and like it's an extra level of complication. It's really not, though. It really helps. If you've got a good sense of angles, like if you can sort of visualize angles, then just give your players that information. So instead of saying, because you want to be because these corridors sort of go in all sorts of different directions, you can't just simply say it goes northeast. You need to say it sort of goes northeast at like a 10-degree angle. It gives you a little bit more information just so that it's a relative amount of accuracy. But I told Ted whenever he walked into that triangular chamber, I said it's vaguely triangular. I remember saying that. And it's vaguely 20 feet wide on a side, right? But Ted basically got the spirit of it, and what he drew is very similar to what is actually on the real map here. But you can see it doesn't perfectly line up. But there's nothing that Ted has drawn here, and a lot of this was Matt actually as well.
That's true.
A lot of this, none of what Ted has drawn here, even though it is not 100% accurate, I would say it's probably about 75 to 80, is not going to interfere with the comprehension of the level. Like it's not, things aren't going to be screwed up so beyond a point where they're just working on bad information. You know, it's accurate enough. Remember, it's just good enough is all you really need. All right. So that's how you want to go about doing caverns and tunnels and the like. You can afford to be much more meticulous with complicated drawings like here on level. I don't want to give away the level number on the Halls of Thoth here.
Oh no, it's fine, John. I don't mind.
The debouchement level here is basically a work of art at this point. I think Ted, you were using this as sort of like your playground to learn Miro, right? So
yeah. So after I played for a while, with that dungeon I showed you, then I started tracing over the old drawing to make the new drawing a lot more clear and legible and so on. And you know, again, the best way to learn how to use this is for actual, you know, practical, not just scribbling, but like I need to figure out how to convey 3 sarcophaguses in a 15 by 30 room or whatever.
yeah.
And so it's a little messy because we learned some things about layers that slightly too late to have this be nice and neat.
Yep.
But I don't care. That's the point. I imagine if Mort's drawing maps, he's scratched stuff off, he's redrawn it. You know, he's got crossed stuff out and made notes and things like that because his perception changes of a space after he's interacted with it. Like, oh, there's a secret door here, or oh, that corridor I didn't notice right away, or whatever. You know, so
yeah. And I think it's actually much more aesthetically appealing to see a map that's been worked over a few times, right?
Absolutely.
It's sort of like having like the character sheet with the coffee stains on it, you know, or looking over old character sheets from when you were a kid. It's just, there's something about like, this has been heavily played that just lends a sort of sense of like, yeah, man, like we did that. Like look what Ted drew here. You know what I mean? Like, this is badass. Like this was created simply from sharing minds together, like sharing imaginations together. And it just sort of like, look what appears on the page. You know, you did that. You created that. You know what I mean? Purely from the words that I spoke, you know, and it's basically a facsimile of what has been published in this work that they have no knowledge of, that they've never seen. And there's an immense amount of satisfaction that's derived from that. I mean, look at this thing. I mean, it's gorgeous. Plus Ted added in all this fucking cool shit with the chasm, the chasm.
Oh, I got a little autistic there. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me zoom into that. Hell yeah, man. Look at that stuff right there. Little 3D action going on.
Bridge of Khazad-dûm got going on there.
But you can see here, there are remnants of what used to be the Owlbear map. So if we go to the debouchement itself,
it was so crude.
Anything that you actually see that's in light blue was actually me taking a screenshot of what we had in Owlbear and importing it into Miro, and then Ted was drawing the black lines to trace on top. But you can see where the word debouche was written. That was from Owlbear, and then Ted rewrote with the text tool debouchement there. But actually,
you see a lot of arrows on this level and color coding. It's another great thing that we've done is color coded certain things.
Yeah.
You know, arrows to remind us of stuff. The magic mouths down there are little, you know, lips with an MM in them, you know, that kind of thing. So
that can certainly jazz things up. Yeah. And the games that I play in person at my local game store too, some of the players have actually really taken to the mapping as well, which is really cool. They use iPads and they have like just real basic drawing programs. I wish I could recommend some for you, put it in the description below, but I'm sure if you just did a quick search in the App Store for it, instead of drawing on graph paper, because they're all young kids and they're cooler than I am, they don't draw on paper. They actually use a slimmed down version of like a whiteboard app for iPad and actually draw these dungeons. But in one game I was playing Barrow Maze, which was a Megadungeon, and I was the mapper, because no one else had actually done player mapping. And this is what caused them to then, from that point forward, want to player map, because they realized how cool it was, because I'm a cool guy.
That's right.
But this is...
Ooh, sweet, John. That's awesome.
Yeah, not too bad, right? So this is the section of the Barrow Maze that we explored. And this is using that graph paper that I showed. But my point in showing this is to show you that this is a worked over map. This is something that I was constantly revising and changing as we explored. And I take, you know, even though the campaign's over, I'm keeping it because I'm really proud of the work that I did. And I am not an artist. Like, I'm like, yeah, this is sweet. Point being, this is a really fun activity to do. It can seem daunting, especially when you're dealing with software. But my recommendation would be if you want to try out Miro or you want to try out whatever drawing apps are incorporated into your VTT of choice, is to find a simple dungeon map and try to copy it. Try to draw it on your own using those tools on a blank sheet of graph paper, either by hand or in the VTT, and then get used to those user interfaces. That's the best way to learn. Instead of just staring at a blank page and sort of getting frozen up, just try to copy an existing simple dungeon map. And then if you're a player, I highly recommend suggesting to your referee that you would like to do that next time and see what they say. And I almost 100% guarantee that your referee will be into it because it takes a lot of load off of them. Some referees really enjoy that kind of prep. And that's really cool. I am not one of those referees. I got too much other crap to do in my life. The least amount of stuff that I have to do, I always go in that direction. And I do plan to do another video where I talk about my own process with prepping. I know that's been another thing that's been requested by a lot of folks. But that's a little insight into one of the things that I do is people often ask, like, how do I prep a Megadungeon of this size when it's so huge? And I shoulder off as much of the burden as I possibly can onto my players. They don't have to do a lot, so give them something to do.
At the start of Arden, I had beautiful brown hair and full head, and now worked my little fingers to the little nubbins, and I'm gray and shriveled.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's about it. So yeah. If you're interested in Miro, it's free. If you can pay more for wider access, but I think for your average tabletop role-playing game enthusiast, you get 3 boards for free, and a board is all of this. That's one board. You get 3 for free. You could put an entire campaign on one. We have not encountered any lag so far, knock on wood, but we have a lot of information in this very small use of the board. And we have seen no lag whatsoever, and we have experienced lag in every other VTT. And we have experience with all the majors. We played, well, I have anyways. Ted and I have experience with Foundry and Roll20 and Owlbear extensely. Ted played
there
with
was
Fantasy.
One other, wasn't there?
We did Fantasy Grounds real briefly when we were doing Adventurers League one time. But I think I have a little bit more experience than you in that one. But anyways, regardless, if you got one that's your favorite, go for it. But just be aware that when you're doing player mapping, each individual line takes up RAM. And so and it's all being shared amongst each other, especially these browser-based ones. So you have to kind of be careful because the memory will start to kind of catch up with you. Miro seems to be the catch-all solution for us at this time. I'm not saying there's not a better solution out there. And this is a key thing before we sign off. The key thing, which probably is tacit, doesn't need to be said, is that it needs to be collaborative. You need to have software that allows everyone to see what you're doing in real time. Yeah. Right. There are tons of awesome dungeon creation software out there, like Dungeon Scrawl, Dungeon Draft. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but there's so many cool ones. But they're all made for GMs to prep before they show it to the player, to create beautiful maps that they then show to their players using Fog of War. There is very little out there that is actually collaborative. And which is why we're using a software program that is not designed for role-playing games, right? But it needs to be something that everyone can join up together and be together in the real time and see what the other person is doing, which is why VTTs are so nice to use. It's just that they have very rudimentary and memory-limited drawing tools, which is why I was saying, like, if you've got programming knowledge, you can make a VTT that's based around shared dungeon mapping. Yeah, it'd be great.
Because they're really meant for you, the player, adding a few notes or marks on a background map.
Right.
That's a single object, very little RAM comparatively. And you write, some fireball here or trap here or whatever.
Yeah.
And so a few lines is all it's really meant to do. And then by the time I'd gotten halfway through the debouchement level, Owlbear was like, "What are you doing to me?"
Yeah. Yeah, for those of you who watched the Scouring of the Shire, where we had like numerous tokens on the map, it was not feasible. I had to stop in the middle of the session and erase the tokens because it was so slow.
Yeah.
But that's not the priority for these VTTs. Their priority is automation. That's what it's all about for VTTs, right? Is to reduce the amount of math that you have to do. And they do that very, very well. but they are not conducive to player mapping. But rudimentary, and if it's a small dungeon like the one that I just did with Ted, no problem at all. But if you're doing a mega dungeon like Rapanathik or Arden or Barrow Maze, I mean, forget about it. You're gonna have to find a different solution. Of course, all things considered, what you ideally are doing are sitting around a table with a piece of paper and doing it together, because there's nothing that beats that. But that's a lot harder.
The old days.
That's right, the old days. Okay, so I think that'll do it. I'd really love, both of us would really love to see your comments about solutions that you found or questions that you have about mapping. But that is how we're doing it, and we are continuing to learn as we go. Like we said, we are not experts at this. If you have other software that you can recommend, we'd love to take a look at it. If you give any of the stuff that we've tried, that we've conveyed here a whirl, let us know how it works for you. Because we think it's a really cool aspect of old school play that has gone long forgotten and should be brought back into the mainstream. So go forth, minions, and do our bidding.
Fly, my pretties, fly!
That's right. All right. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this Tack-on Effects. We will be back to our regularly scheduled programming this week as well. So please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please share amongst your friends and hit that bell icon so you can get a notification every time we put up another cool video like this. And until next time, have a great week, everybody. Take care.